Hello, dear students. I am Mrs. Rachna Anand and welcome to the Political Science class of Standard 9th. Today we are going to study lesson number 4, the United Nations, part 1. So, let's get started. In this module, we are going to study the United Nations introduction and background, the chronology of the establishment of the United Nations, the objectives of United Nations, and the principles of the United Nations. Let us see the background. Two world wars were fought at the start of the 20th century. Life and property were destroyed on a large scale in these wars. As a result, the League of Nations was established after the First World War, and the United Nations was established after the Second World War out of a realization that there has to be a mechanism to establish world peace. The League of Nations did not succeed at all. But after the use of the nuclear weapons in the Second World War, the idea took root that such destructive wars should be stopped and that it is the collective responsibility of all nations to do so. The United Nations was established after the Second World War to instill this understanding among all nations. The chronology of the establishment of the United Nations. The Atlantic Treaty was signed between Prime Minister of England Sir Winston Churchill and American President Franklin D. Roosevelt during the Second World War on 14th August 1941. According to this treaty, a decision was taken to set up a permanent mechanism to establish international security after the Second World War was over. Detailed discussions followed on this decision in two conferences among Allied powers in 1944 and 1945, and a draft of the treaty to establish an international organization was prepared. At San Francisco in America, representatives of 50 countries drafted the Charter of the United Nations after discussions. As soon as the war got over, the Charter was signed on 24th October 1945 and the United Nations was established. The United Nations is an international organization of sovereign nations. The objectives of the United Nations. The United Nations is the world's largest international organization. In the beginning, only 50 countries were members of the United Nations. Today, this number has gone up to 193. All these member nations come together on the platform of the United Nations. The United Nations has its own definite objectives. Briefly, the United Nations takes up all necessary measures for establishing international peace. These are the specific objectives of the United Nations. First, to establish friendly relations among nations. Second, to enhance international security by solving international disputes. And third, to safeguard and foster human rights and freedom. Along with these, the United Nations also aim at enhancing economic cooperation at the international level. All member countries are bound by duty to respect the diplomatic privileges of sovereign nations, not to attack other countries, and abide by international law and treaties. The United Nations is an organization created by the coming together of the sovereign nations. Naturally, it is based on certain principles and rules. The principles of the United Nations. First, all member nations will have the same status. There is no discrimination among nations based on geographical size, means how large or small the country is, economic status, that means how rich or poor the country is, or the military power, which means how strong or weak the military of the country is. Second, all member nations of the United Nations should respect the freedom and geographical unity of other member nations. According to the laws of the United Nations, a country cannot invade or attack another country's territory. In today's scenario, through news channels, we all know that China is invading India's territory, which is absolutely wrong according to the laws of the United Nations. Third, all member nations should solve their international disputes and mutual differences by peaceful means. Some of the methods are discussion, deliberation, negotiation, and intervention. This is all about part 1. Now let us see the assignment. But before that, please read the chapter carefully and answer the following questions. Question number 1. Write the objectives of the United Nations. Question number 2. When was the Charter of the United Nations signed? Question number 3. Between whom and when was the Atlantic Treaty signed? Question number 4. Today, how many countries are the members of the United Nations? And question number 5 is, write the principles of the United Nations. In the next module, we are going to study the structure of the United Nations and its 6 main organs, namely General Assembly, Security Council, Economic and Social Council, International Court of Justice, Trusteeship Council, and Secretariat. We are also going to study their structures and their function in detail. So till then, keep studying, children. Thank you.